Okay, so this is rule number 9 from Elements of Style, Elementary Rules of Usage. The number of the subject determines the number of the verb, right? Obviously, you want subjects and verbs to agree. That's an elementary lesson, but it's hard to apply in practice, okay? And that's what I'm going to talk about today, some of the ways where we commonly err in this rule, okay? So, when we talk about the subject agreeing with the verb, we have to first be able to identify those in a sentence, right? The subject is usually the subject of the sentence. Normally it comes at the beginning, not always, but most of the time, right? And the verb has to agree with it in number, right? In number. So it could be singular, it could be plural. You need a singular subject for a singular verb, and vice versa. You need a plural verb for a plural subject, okay? That's, in theory, easy, but in practice it gets tricky sometimes. So here's an example. The bittersweet flavor of youth, its trials, its joys, its adventures, its challenges, is not soon forgotten. So to test your awareness of subject-verb agreement, you have to first be able to identify the subject in this introductory phrase here, right? Because you have a few different words that could qualify as the subject. Flavor is the subject. Bittersweet describes flavor. It's an adjective. Of youth is a prepositional phrase. Flavor is the subject. We can all hopefully determine that that is a singular subject. No S on the end, right? So it's a singular subject requiring a singular verb. The verb doesn't come until after the next dash, right? So remember we talked about dashes. So this is a good example, right? That you choose to use a dash here for all this list of things that youth is made up of, okay? And they end the dash. And then we come to our verb, is, right? Is agrees with flavor. It's singular. That's singular. Okay? There's all these plural nouns in between, right? That can kind of trick you and think, well, the verb should be are because you have challenges right next to it, right? Because we would say in another sentence, challenges are part of life. We wouldn't say challenges is part of life, right? But that's not the subject. This is the subject. So this is the verb, okay? Another example here, a carton of grapefruits from Florida were delivered. I kept both options there, right? Which one is the correct one? Well, we have to figure out what the subject is. Is it grapefruits? No. Is it Florida? No. It's carton. Carton, again, is obviously singular, so you need a singular verb. Okay? Now notice that this singular verb has an S. This singular verb has an S. Okay? This singular subject does not have an S, and this singular subject does not have an S. Okay? So it can get a little confusing because singular verbs most of the time have S's, okay? While singular subjects obviously don't. Okay? So the verb kind of goes against the rule we're used to. When we think of plural, we think of S, right? But with verbs, if it ends in S, it's actually most of the time going to be singular. Okay? So another way that this gets tricky is when you're dealing with compound subjects. Okay, compound subjects, as you know, right, are joined by a conjunction. So it could be Joe and John went to the store, right? Or it could be joined by or, right? Or nor, for example. So either my friend or that person are going to, right? That would be an example of a compound subject joined by or, okay? Now this is a tricky part because when it's joined by and, the verb is always going to be plural, right? Joe and Kristen are going to the dance together, right? Of course it's are. You wouldn't say Joe and Kristen is. That's, just by speaking the language, you know that, okay? But what about when it's this? Let's see. Let's say my grandparents or Aunt Ellen, and we'll say, is it either come or comes over for dinner each week? It's tough, right? We don't know. Most of the time we would just use the plural verb because it sounds like it's two subjects, right? But it's really not two subjects because it's or. It's not and. Right? It's one or the other. Apparently Aunt Ellen and your grandparents don't like each other, right? It's never, or you'd say and. Okay, it's one or the other. Okay, so this is where you have to look at the last subject. Aunt Ellen, is that singular or plural?
Singular.
Singular. Okay, so the verb should be singular here. Okay, should be comes over for dinner each week. Okay, with an S, right? Because singular verbs have S's. But if I switch the order, Aunt Ellen or my grandparents, then it changes to the singular verb, right? Without the S. Okay, so it can just be determined by the order. Now that's only when you're dealing with or nor. If it's and, the order doesn't matter. It's always both of them, right? But if it's or nor, it does matter which one is the last one listed. Then you use that verb. Okay. Now often in speech I would say my grandparents or Aunt Ellen come over for dinner each week without thinking about it, right? In speech, it's not noticed. But when we do these things in writing, we want to be careful that we're actually following the rules we should. Okay, so the number of the subject determines the number of the verb. Whether it's these compound subjects or a subject that has a prepositional phrase in between it and the verb, you have to be clear, what's the subject, what's the verb. Make sure that a singular subject has a singular verb, and a plural subject has a plural verb.